Okay. Okay, so welcome everybody to this meeting of the Joint Audit Committee. Warm welcome to those for whom it's the first meeting. Chief Superintendent Joyce. Hope you went on to testing. From Jane Heppel and from Devinda, who are both a SIPA conference, which we agreed, was a very useful and important thing for them to be at. And apologies from our Vice Chair, Richard Hollins, who has COVID, I'm afraid. I think I was stretching my mind. I think it's the first meeting he's ever missed. It is, yes. So, yeah. I'm informed that the Deputy Chief Constable is dealing with an urgent matter, but will be here as soon as he can. So we hope that won't be too long, but obviously he has other duties as well. Does anyone have any declarations of interest they need to make? We've got the minutes of the last meeting. Is everyone satisfied that they're an accurate record? Nobody spotted anything they want to amend?
I gave
you gave
very small amendments.
Yeah, they were circulated.
Oh, they were circulated. Yes, yeah. So with those amendments, everybody happy that they're an accurate record? Thank you very much. We've not noted any matters arising. Has anybody spotted anything they think we've not covered off yet? Okay, good. So that fairly rapidly takes us to item 5, which is the risk management update. So I know Lynn's going to be covering what Jane said, but should we go straight to Fiona to kick off on this?
Thanks, Chair. Morning, everyone. So just to pick up a few key bits from the risk paper that's been circulating to everyone. So at the last meeting, we were asked about the project risks and how we transfer risks from when there's a project over into business as usual. So we've got a process in place between, so the change teams fall within part of FDA anyway. So those risks, there is a process in place to transfer them once a project closes through the risk team within Project World and the risk team within Military. There's nothing, so from the op model that we had, there were 2 risks that transferred from the project into BAU. Neither of them hit the threshold to be a corporate risk. So they are on department risk registers, and there's no new projects that have closed in the last quarter that would have transferred over. But that process is there, so when a project does close, we'll review the risks as we do with any new that come in. If it's a corporate risk, it will be presented here, and we can give the clarity that it is a new risk that's been added. It depends on the project.
So before you move off that,
yeah,
and Fiona, I think there was concern at the committee that we did not see at any point what that level of risk looked like. So there's a difference between being reassured that it was all right, being assured that it was okay by seeing what the evidence is for that. And I would have expected this committee at some point during that process to have seen a copy, to have seen what the risks were that the force had identified and how they were being followed up. And that hasn't happened. And I think when it's a major change programme, the committee do expect that they will have oversight of the thinking that's happening, whether it's in the force or the Commissioner's office, around that change. So I remain disappointed that having asked 2 or 3 times to see what that risk register looked like, all we've got is three lines at the end that says the process was fine and we've covered it all off, which isn't to doubt at all that was the case, but this doesn't give us evidence of that.
Yeah, and I suppose they're the bits that there's obviously a threshold and a process around the escalation of a risk onto the corporate risk register. So where those project risks are being managed as part of the project and wouldn't hit that threshold, ordinarily we wouldn't report on departmental risks. to the committee. So I'll be guided as to kind of how we share that information.
I think if at any point we'd seen the whole thing, we could have made the judgment that said, yeah, it's departmental, and you've covered it off. But we never saw it, so we don't have the evidence that was the case. And I think it's quite important for us as a committee to be able to say we saw what they'd done, we agreed with the way they handled it, it was all fine, which I'm sure would ordinarily be the case. But we cannot say, if anyone asks us publicly, what were the risks, how was it handled, anything other than they told us it was all right, which isn't sufficient.
I think you can hear that next time, or we can bring a summary of the risks we encountered.
That would be very helpful.
And then
Yeah.
show what happened with those risks in
Yeah.
mitigation and the ones that were transferred to the ANU, so we can bring that next time.
That was what we hoped for.
Sorry. I just want to echo what you said there, Chair. I think it was, what, 4 times it's been asked for?
Yeah.
And nothing's been produced. And, okay, to get something, as you just said there, if we're asked as an audit committee, what do we say? Well, we never saw the report, but, oh yeah, we've been told it's fine. Sorry, no, I'm uncomfortable with that.
In the public realm, as it is at the moment, especially in Birmingham, we need to be have more assurance. So that was, if it can come next time, that was very helpful. Yes.
Just quickly, Fiona, I think given all the change that's taken place since April of this year, I think there's a distinction about what normally happens in the fall, and the fact that the force has gone through a massive change program, and it's kind of understanding the whole of that. So you say there was 2 risks that have been identified. What are they?
So the 2 that have transferred over
Yeah.
to, I'd need to come back with the detail of what they are. They're held on the departmental risk register for it now, so I'd need to come back to you to confirm.
All right, okay. Out of the enormity of all the change, just for like 2 risks to be highlighted, it is either shows that the programme worked really well and all the other risks have been managed or not, and not having the information doesn't allow us to make that judgment.
If you could circulate that to members of the committee as an immediate follow-up rather than waiting for it. But that's okay. Okay, thank you for that. So do you want to carry on, Fiona?
So just in terms of the main paper then, so there's been no new corporate risks that have been raised over the last quarter, and there's currently no critical risks on the corporate risk register. Just going on to some of the updates in terms of some of the areas, so particularly around a couple of them that are likely to be subject to closure over the next quarter. So just the risk around recruitment and retention of the uplift. So the uplift targets have been met. We're just awaiting around the retention strategy that Pod are currently writing. At the point that we've got that retention strategy, that risk will go to the governance board for foreclosure. And without risk. Likewise, there's an update regarding the management of vulnerability, where actually it's been subject to the risk for quite some time. There is a need for us now to review what that risk is, update that risk, and potentially create some more specific risks within that vulnerability, because it's quite a broad banner, and actually we probably need to just refine what those particular risks are. So that's likely to be that will likely be updated for the next Jack. The other one, in terms of the officer and staff right to work checks that was raised at the last committee. So significant progress has been made since that point. There's been some additional staff that have been moved on to that team. There's an action plan that's been worked through by colleagues in Pod. And again, by the next joint audit, we'd hope that actually, again, that risk will have been for closure with the progress that's been made by the team. So there is Pete and the team have got oversight of that risk, and it's just been worked through.
Okay, good.
Just in terms of some of the risks that are just coming through. So again, there is the risk around workforce representation. So that is, we've got the position on it. There is a lot of work that's being done by the D&I team within pod. And again, that's the mitigation that's in place for that risk. It's gone to the relevant governance boards for that risk to be downgraded. And pleasingly, there's then 4 that are covered on the paper that have been through committee that are now subject to closure. So one of them is around the Criminal Justice Services legitimacy, which was the description of the risk. This was in relation to the backlog of cases across the courts. As with some of the other risks that we've seen, there is a point where West Midlands Police physically can't do anything else to mitigate against that risk. So actually mitigation's there as much as we can, and we'll continue to monitor that through the relevant governance board and through Mr. Hill.
Just going back to the issue of workforce representation.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking as a layperson, that would not entirely surprise me. And clearly, you know, some of the national publicity that the service has received, you know, is likely to have had an impact on that. So, other than using the usual channels, I wonder, you know, what further, might be a question to wait till the deputy chief constables here, I suppose. But I just wonder what thought has been given to how women and people from minorities, you know, might be encouraged again to think about policing as a career. Whether you know there is a major reputational issue for the service as a whole across the country that we're somehow having to tackle.
Yeah, I'll perhaps come in there.
Yes.
I can come pick that up with my new people podcast on. So we are doing an awful lot of work at the moment, looking at different routes to those that we've traditionally used, rather than just necessarily go to kind of some of the outreach events we have and careers fairs and so on. We're genuinely looking at kind of broader events that are happening kind of within the city of Birmingham, but then beyond in the wider West Mids region. We're actually working very closely with the support of the APCC and with Charmaine's kind of oversight as well, and help to really kind of, you know, challenge our thinking as how we've traditionally kind of attended events. So I'm really happy that we are adopting a much broader mindset as to how we do that. You're absolutely right. There's definitely a challenge in terms of the national position, and it's absolutely something that we need to provide both assurance and kind of presence and visibility. So we're very keen to continue to progress that. You know, I think we're doing an awful lot of work, but we need to do more and more and more, as we always do.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I agree, Peter. I think the force is doing a lot, but I think the question is, if that's at senior level, that's where the question is. But where's the representation at senior level? That's where the question is. What seems to be seen is from there. How long is it going to take?
And that's absolutely kind of, we have to ensure that wherever possible we are reflecting of our communities, you know, at all level within the organisation. I think there's definitely something about kind of that whole kind of approach to recruitment at every single level, not just in West Mids, but kind of in the broader policing perspective. And we have to keep it under review. We have to constantly change ourselves as well. I see that as my kind of one of my roles.
Carry on, sorry, Ian, if we're interrupting.
No. So the other risks that have been subject to closure or de-escalation over the quarter. So you remember that we brought around the Connect officer briefing that was lacking, and I updated at the last committee, I think, in terms of the new app that had been developed. Subject to that, the feedback from staff, there's been further iterations of that app and some really positive feedback from the users and from officers and staff on the ground as well. So that is now subject to closure. The app is in place and it's managing as the officer came to. The other one that has been for closure is the overtime app. So again, you'll recall a previous committee where we reported around the overtime app and there were some complications around people being able to submit multiple entries, going to wrong cost codes. IT&D have worked really hard now to put the relevant fixes in place for that, and that's now operating as it should. So again, that one is now.
Thank you, Fiona. Just a couple of general questions here. So corporate health, which is 9:15 onwards. It's at 9:20, it says it's making positive progress in reducing the backlog of referrals. However, in some outcome information that's come to us through other meetings, they've actually gone from 14 to 21 days to a 6-week delay. So whether that comes through you or them, we could do with understanding what the issues are there, because that seems quite what that support gets to the officers, which is at odds with the couple of sentences here.
If you're talking about occupational health referral times, we actually had an update in some Performance Day last week. So yes, there were some very significant delays. There's been a new manager put in charge of occupational health, and they put in place a load of remedial work, including increasing resilience, resource, and changes in the processes, and also looking at the reason for referrals. So some of the referrals are appropriate for occupational health, and already what they're seeing in, I think, the last quarter, it's a significant reduction in those wait times. So probably the first quarter of this year, that would have been high, and that would have been what's in this report. The most recent information actually was starting to make progress.
Well, that's good to know. Thank you. And then 925 talks about public protection units and the fact that they'll be developing a non-recent sexual offence investigation team, historically known as the historical team, and 21 staff are going to be brought into that. I understand there's vacancies within public protection anyway, and I think it was 21 staff were going to be put into the PPU. So is this the 21 that were originally going in there, or is this another group of officers? Because otherwise there'll be no change in the vacancy levels there.
I think we'd have to give some detail about the exact workforce arrangements within PPU, but certainly the model changes are designed precisely to give PPU great resilience. So certainly the road investigation is a priority for the head of PPU. So there's people going in to supplement the road teams. There's also some of the work that currently dominating the adult investigation teams asked to other low risk capacity to medical investigators, and that will free up capacity within adult investigation teams to further supplement the RASO work. So there is quite a significant piece of work going on from, I think, the 21st September onwards to reprioritise work within PPU. So that is an area of growth for them per se.
And when you say low risk offences, no good teams, what sort of offences are we looking at?
So we're not talking about rape, it's about very low levels of domestic abuse type of workload. So there is a recognition that PPU for many years has not had a resource in its big volume. So part of the solution to that is actually to give local investigators like full CID responsibility for standard risk domestic abuse cases. And then more serious stuff within the public protection unit where they've got the skills to deal with that.
And where will the training follow on from that then?
There's training programs being put in place already. So the head of DA has been doing a load of work with the LPA commanders and their SLTs to try and embed some basic training around things like DARA processes and so on. Indeed, there's an action that's just come out of the most recent Performance Day that focuses on the ability of local policing officers to do DARA risk assessments, to complete questionnaires appropriately. So there's a whole regime of performance governance built around it.
Another question about 927, which is the structured DBs for operations and then taking that organisational learning and incorporating it in the logs. Is there one place where we could see what this learning is? And then how it's been, disseminated to the force to see that change follow up?
I think in fairness, all of the learning is something that we are within SDA trying to work on at the moment. Our organisational learning manager is just left, so what we're trying to work out is how to reposition their post within SDA, and we'll probably do it is align it to this kind of risk assurance of the business, because we see it as being all part and parcel of the same. That's the police needs to do better, really. So when we identify areas where we fall short, or HMRC say we've got an area that's at risk, we need to have some mitigation in place for that. That's part of an ongoing part of the SDA remodel that we could probably switch you out in greater detail next time we come back, but it is slightly embryonic at the moment.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Bhupinder?
Thanks, Chair. I just want to go back to page 3, financial management, 9.1. I think we've seen this many times. I mean, it's no criticism of anybody here, but I'm not being political here, apart from me being political. But I just want to make the point that, look, at the end of the day, we received the 5th worst financial settlement compared to other forces across the country. How many times we've got to sit down with Home Office people? Are they just paying us lip service? I mean, come on, compared to the leafy shires, what are they getting, what are we getting? The financial crisis in Birmingham, there's going to be more and more pressures based upon Westminster Police. This isn't right. What options are open to us? I'm sure that will.
If you go forward to the value for money profiles and its opening statement about how much more money there would be in the West Midlands if we were funded at the same level as others, it is quite staggering, isn't it?
It is.
I mean, I mean, the one option is the one that the Commissioner's taken, isn't it, of raising the precept to the highest level, but beyond that. You're asking people the impossible.
So, Chair, I mean, we are doing all we can in terms of our briefings with the Home Office and so on. We invited the Home Office finance team specifically to have a kind of face-to-face meeting with us not too long ago here at Lloyd House. I also sit on the technical reference group for the formula funding review that's kind of underway at the moment. And in doing so, try to ensure that our kind of case is made at each point. The chief obviously also from a kind of a lead perspective does that in all of his discussions as well. I think I can say rest assured we are doing all of we can from both a force and an office of the Police and Crime Commissioner's perspective, but it's a point that we do understand.
Bring it to the audit committee, I think.
Thank you.
Just to kind of be a little bit more spiky about it, precept here is too low
Yes.
compared to other places. I mean, that's not for reasons to do with police and crime commissioners. That goes back as a legacy issue back to police authorities in the first 10 years of the century. We raise kind of 60–70% per head on precept what they do in Manchester and the other metropolitan forces outside London. So, you know, if there was a decision to seek a unilateral increase in precept that was above that elsewhere, that would do a lot to help us, but that requires an enormous amount of kind of effort across a variety of fronts. So yes, the funding formula hurts us, and it's the failure to implement the previous one hurts us even more, but we are also always on the back foot because it's our precept is so low.
Yeah. Thanks, Bhupinder.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that, Fiona. So, Lynn, you're presenting the Commissioner's risk.
I am, yes, on behalf of
Yeah, yeah.
So as you know, the PCC risk register is based on the statutory functions of the Police and Crime Commissioner and also on topical risks that we face in terms of the delivery of the Police and Crime Plan. There's been some movement in a couple of the statutory risks this time round. If you remember at the last committee, we increased the risk around resources not being sufficient to deliver the Police and Crime Plan objectives, and we put that up to the highest level that we could get to. We've lowered that back down because we've now had the pay award, which was fully funded, which was giving us some uncertainty last time we reported to committee. And the latest budget report that went to the Strategic Police and Crime Board on Tuesday explains the position on the finances, which is stable at the moment. We still have some pressures, but they are being managed. So the CFO was comfortable to lower that risk back down. And still high, obviously, for the pressures that Pins has just mentioned, but we were able to lower it down from the highest risk. The second statutory risk is around the lack of effective partnerships. And as you'll be aware, the position in Birmingham City Centres throws some uncertainty. Birmingham City Council is giving us some uncertainty at the moment due to the Section 114 notice. We are in the position of identifying how that affects us in terms of our contracts and our partnerships. So we've taken a cautionary approach to increase the risk in the risk register around that at the moment, but there is work underway. And we're in contact with our equivalent officers in the City Council to try and establish what the impact might be. There's a new risk that's been added to the risk register, which is in relation to the potential transfer of the governance arrangements of the Police and Crime Commissioner to the combined authority for the West Midlands, Mayor of the West Midlands. And that's from a business continuity perspective, to ensure that if the transfer was to happen from day one, we could still continue with robust governance arrangements. Taking on board the comments that the Chair raised earlier around project governance, we have started some early preparations around this, but very early preparations because the political landscape is constantly changing. So we have set up a project group, but we'll report to the committee in due course around what those project risks might be as that develops. In terms of the topical risks around the delivery of the Police and Crime Plan, there's one risk that has been removed, and that's in relation to accessing police services. And that is showing a sustained improved picture over a period of time. I think in terms of, just to put it into context for those members that weren't at board on Tuesday, West Midlands Police is now ranked second for answering 999 calls within 10 seconds, which is a massive improvement on where we were, say, 12 months ago. That's been sustained over a period. So, and the 101s is also presenting a much improved picture, and the direction of travel is really positive on that. So we've removed that topical risk from the risk register.
Okay,
And that is the update.
thank you. Any questions or comments from anyone?
Yeah, just for you, I think just picking up on your earlier comments, not only probably briefing around the project risks, it might also be helpful if we describe some changes we've made internally to our risk management process.
Yes.
Because I think it's fair to say that Melissa's team done a load of work taking to a position where it's quite a haphazard approach to risk management. There's a lot more control and oversight than there was previously. So whether you want that as a standalone briefing at some point, either before or after this, or some others.
I think that would be helpful. I mean, we have in the past done training sessions for members of the committee on how risk is handled. So it might be a briefing outside of the formal committee might be useful, although we pick up on Jonathan's point about the questions. That at the moment, the question mark that's hanging over the organisational structures. But thank you, that's a helpful offer, and I'll liaise with Lynn on what's best point in place for that to happen. Thank you. Okay, so is there anything else on the risk register? Okay, thanks very much for those reports then, and we will move on to Barnsley's Inspectorate update. Rachel.
Morning, Chair. Since the last Joint Audit Committee, we've been through the final stage of appeal, and that now concluded on Friday. So we are in the final stages of just appealing areas that the HMIC want to triangulate in terms of what we found they've done during the inspection. And then we should receive the report back for factual accuracy checking in November, with the final report being published in February 24. So Peel at this point, in terms of in-force activity, is essentially concluded. Since the last Joint Audit Committee as well, we've had numerous recommendations coming through to us from HMRC, and at the time of writing, there had been an increase in our recommendations of all causes of concern, 45 level 2s and 7 level 3 recommendations, and an additional 16 AFI level 2. It's a movable feast, and we are constantly driving forward recommendations. It's a final process. At the moment, at the time of writing, there were 5 submitted for closure through the DCC's panel, and at the moment we're in a drive to really address those recommendations that are outstanding. And that means going out to areas of business, talking to the silver leaves, and supporting them to provide the evidence to make sure we achieve closure in a meaningful way. And then this is monitored through the governance boards and then through the monthly In terms of published reports and recommendations since the last audit, the oldest of those is the inspection of how effective police forces are in terms of which was published in July. This inspection was a national thematic, and the HMIC criteria was really to look at the public confidence in policy structure and governance around firearms, how we address selection, training and command deployment, and then the capacity and capability to deploy both locally and regionally in terms of firearms capability. The post-inspection report contained several themes which really looked at resources and training, where we found there had been generally and nationally a reduction in trained firearms officers, and that overall the armed response vehicle function was essentially met by an overtime budget. So there was a recognition that within that there were specific areas of adequate resources in terms of firearms commanders, but others still needed to be looked at. And also during that resources and training programme, greater care is required to be taken around complaints in service issues. In terms of CTFOs, which is the counter-terrorism firearms officers, which was good both locally and regionally. The report looked at training and exercising, and here they found that there was good governance and that the training and facilities and general training needed a review essentially to make sure it was meeting requirements for regional and national levels for training and exercising. They went on to look at learning and agreed that most forces had an organisational learning board, but the learning wasn't always shared out at regional or national level. And HMIC felt that more forces should use body-worn video in terms of the debrief process and to make sure that learning was comprehensive. And then governance. There was a review of governance and the processes and procedures. And it was felt that the prescribed governance process was not always followed in terms of chief officer lead reporting to regional, then on to national, and greater scrutiny was required around armoury management. Overall, HMIC found that there were 12 recommendations overall. These have been taken up through our governance board to ensure that they're progressed, and we've already had updates in and silver leads been allocated in terms of that review, so it's well under. The next report was the homicide prevention report, which looked at inspection of police contribution, prevention of homicide, inspection and homicide prevention. And this report was initiated as a result of the College of Policing writing and publishing the homicide prevention strategy. And then essentially it was a joint inspection with HMIC and the clergy being involved in it as well, so they could look at how this had progressed through the forces. The inspection essentially wanted to look at how effectively forces understood that homicide in their areas, including underlying risk forces, and how effectively forces contributed to the prevention of homicides, including how they then use that new homicide prevention framework. It was felt that whilst homicide had dropped in terms of roles, there was still an unacceptable level of homicide, and on review, there was disproportionality in the victim profile. The themes which looked at during the inspection include leadership and governance, national and local analysis, current arrangements preventing police forces and from providing more detailed information on homicide, victims and offenders, and then moving on The HMIC identified a number of elements which might help forces moving forward prevent homicide. So they identified that an identifiable chief officer lead for homicide prevention with control of or a high degree of influence over prevention resources was the most comprehensive way to proceed, rather than having it across disparate portfolios. An accurate strategic assessment that determines and defines the causes and patterns of homicide and serious violence is required across forces. Sitting beneath that, control strategy, which defined the homicide causes and which was regularly communicated to officers and staff at all levels, was required, so that effective resource allocation decisions could be made. Identifiable operational leads for the causes of homicide with control of or a high degree of influence over prevention resources were needed across the board. And that homicide and serious violence problem profiles based on a wide range of information support. There was also attention paid to whether the full communication strategy within forces target homicide prevention messages to people most at risk. And then further work looking at the accurate identification of serious violence hotspots using analysis of crime data and other information, including the intervention part of the data. And then an effective review and rapid debrief process that allows officers and staff to learn lessons to prevent homicide and serious violence. And this resulted in 3 recommendations for senior officers. One being that the Home Office should make sure that forces can provide relevant and detailed information on each homicide by the online portal. And this was required to be updated by forces within 30 days of an incident. The second, that Chief Constables in England and Wales should devise an approach to make sure their forces can provide analytical reports concerning death investigations. And the third one, that Chief Constable should make sure their force quickly identify lessons learned from homicide and serious violence incidents. Moving on to the final inspection.
Should we pause on that? Because I know there were a number of, and Richard had posed a couple of questions, and I think Kath also had. You've given us a very full description of what the national report said. I suppose the most immediate question then is that does that mirror what we ourselves know about the West Midlands? So, you know, this description of what the profiles are, where the risks are, at a national level, how far does that fit in our situation? Have we done that analysis, or is that something that, you know, as a result of recommendations we're now trying to take?
Sorry, that's about the homicide inspection.
Yeah, the homicides.
So we are one of 10 forces nationally that are involved in the Home Office led homicide work, because we are a net contributor to it, as all of the other metropolitan forces are. So I represent force there in 2 reasons. First one, as the Deputy West Midlands. The second reason is because of the NPCC need for alcohol, and a lot of our homicides are driven by nighttime economies. So our profile of homicides is in line with HMIC findings. We have got a strategic assessment of the force. We have got a homicide prevention plan, and I'm satisfied with all of the national recommendations we've got in hand. There is no escaping the fact that us, Greater Manchester and Merseyside and the Metropolitan Police will always remain a net contributor to the totality of homicides nationally.
Have you got something?
So mine is with regards to the paragraph around homicide prevention. So the last line there is quite blunt. It says men are more likely to be victims than women. I know this is the language of the HMIC, but actually I think there should be a butter however after that, because it very much depends on the situation that people find themselves in. You know, if it's in a home, it's more likely to be women. I would suggest if it was out in the public, it's more likely to be men. I think that's a misleading statement by the HMIC. I recognise that you can't do anything to change it, but I just wanted to highlight that because it's a bit blunt in its language. And the other comment I'd make is about page 6, victims and offenders. There's a line in there which is about lessons learned, so we can ensure lessons are learned from reviews. What's the first structure that's in place to ensure that happens, particularly for homicide, domestic abuse and child deaths?
So we immediately put in place a homicide review irrespective of whether it fits into any statutory categories, whether or not it fits into domestic abuse, homicide review, serious violence review, any statutory reviews. The National Homicide Prevention Plan, which we have adopted under our own homicide prevention system, an immediate review as the homicide is being investigated. This is what are the touch points in this individual's life, either the victim or the offender, that could have prevented that taking place. It's the force response.
Thank you. And I do have a question about the custody inspection.
Well, let's let Rachel present, and then we'll pick the questions up. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so in terms of the custody inspection, this was joint inspection with HMIC and the Care Quality Commission in May 23, which is published on the HMIC website. There were found 5 main inspection themes looking at leadership, accountability, partnership working, pre-custody first point of contact, the processes within the custody suite in terms of looking in legal rights and individuals' needs, and then in the cell itself, safeguarding in healthcare, and then finally releasing transfer of custody. HMRC did find positive things around improvement in terms of recording, strip searching, the commitment of the staff as well, and their paid also of things that really matter to those individuals who are in custody space. However, they also found that there were 4 recommendations and 16 advisory, which covered areas including leadership in the custody arena, detainee risk, use of force, legal requirement and guidance. And I've listed those because the areas of improvement are quite specific, so I won't run through them. They are quite specific. As a result of that, the custody and security world have established an improvement plan and need to be addressing those. And then as things were raised during the inspection itself, they were immediately addressed. So we are well aware of how these improvements will look.
Yeah, sure. So this is page 12, and it's headed "Enforcing improved ways cares for detainees." There's some really solid recommendations out there, but I was a bit intrigued about routinely offering distraction materials to detainees, making sure there's sufficient stock, ranging from reading materials and more choice for children and other languages. What sort of items are those suggestions should be available, and how will there be a management of health and safety with passing on those items to the next detainee who comes in?
So I think, to be fair, in certain parts of the custody state, there's some really advanced offers from distraction packs, so things like iPads and tablets that can be passed, particularly to juvenile detainees, that are designed to kind of be trauma informed in their approach. But bearing in mind the inspection across the estate happened as we're opening new custody box that wasn't provided across all of the custody estate. So I think that kind of particular recommendation about making sure it's not just in pockets where we've got very specific offers, but actually broadening out and making sure it's spoken in multiple languages. It is part of the improvement plan that's required.
And does it restrict itself to technology, or is there some other items that we're considering?
It is, to be fair, there's quite a few different bits of materials that could be provided. It doesn't just have to be technology, it's just some of the technological elements like tablets are quite pioneering. That's why I referenced them. That it could be books, it could be writing materials, all sorts of stuff.
There's crayons and all sorts of things, isn't it, that's used in the packs, crayons, and even fidget spinners and all sorts of things are in the packs they're used into custody in Westminster.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you.
And just the final part, in terms of the bar inspection activity, I've listened to what we've actually been through as a position to appeal. So we've looked at obviously Mossy Hotel and the appeal question set, looked at the search audit, we then been through the SOC and what the inspections. And then the forthcoming inspections at this point, since the report was written, we've already concluded the stalking and harassment inspection, and we are now part of the newly announced activism and integrity the lighting inspection, which starts on the 20th of November.
I mean, so yeah, right at the outset, you highlighted the significant number of new recommendations that have come in. So I mean, obviously we recognise it; they're coming all at once. It is, you know, it's quite a lot to deal with. What's the assessment of the capacity that we have to actually respond to those and ensure that actually that's done in a timely fashion, or are there some almost on a back burner while the more pressing ones are dealt with? How would you assess that?
So I can provide confidence to you that there is absolutely none on the back burner. In terms of activity that's taking place currently this week alone, I have flexed the resources available to me under my team who do have the appropriate skill set to be able to deal with recommendations per se and obtain relevant updates and information and evidence gathering activities with the silver leads that have been assigned to all of those recommendations. In terms of the status of those, they all have gold and silver leads assigned to those recommendations. There is, as I've just sort of cited, activity taking place this week and next week for conversations to take place and data gathering exercises with all of those silver leads to obtain updates across all of those recommendations. The new recommendations that have been raised within the last 56 days, for example, have all got initial updates and responses for those, which are just working through our governance process currently to obtain formal sign-off before release to the OPCC and a formal update onto our system in relation to those. We have a monthly HMIC board with the Deputy Chief Constable where the outcomes of those or progress and activity or challenge is placed with the senior leaders around recommendations where we feel we need some heightened activity or some focus on those.
Okay, that's good to hear, because in the past we have had recommendations that have lingered on. So it's good to know that there's a determination to address these in a timely fashion.
If we can, Chair, we've still got too many that are overdue.
Yeah.
So I want us to be in a position where we are dealing with recommendations, AFIs and causes of concern that are not past their date. And at this moment in time, we have too many legacy ones. So with the support of Melissa, Tom, Fee and team, we will be restructuring the HMIC board from January. So from January, we'll be having a series of boards throughout the day, so it'll be a fixed day month. Each one of those will be chaired either by Pete or one of the ACCs, who will be responsible for two things. They will be responsible for their own question set within the team. So if HMIC came back in, what would our evidence be? What would our areas for improvement look like? Where areas are we focusing on? And they will also be responsible for their own outstanding causes of concern, AFIs, and so on. And at the end of the day, every month there'll then be a board chaired by me, with Pete and the ACCs there and the team here. And that board at the end of the day will have an open invite to Jonathan from the OPCC and from our HMIC liaison officer. I want us to get to a position where we have nothing overdue and everything we're working on is current and relevant. My own assessment is we've let too many things slide past their due date, and that's not a great position because, as we've seen today, we end up with another national report with a series of recommendations in, none of which we can do anything about in terms of receiving them. And if we don't get through the overdue ones, it just gets along the list. So
yes,
we will get to that point.
Thank you. I mean, that is good to hear. We'll hope that it works, because as you say, you know, part of the anxiety when the new lot comes in is either they don't get done because you're still doing the ones that are left over, or the ones that are overdue become even more behind time. Okay, thank you. We'll look forward to reports on how that process works. Everyone happy then on the HM? However many initials there are on it. Okay. Thanks very much. Right, can we move on then to the Treasury Management update, which Sue is presenting?
Morning, everyone. So I'm just going to highlight the main points in the Treasury Management report. So in terms of economic update, the interest rate report impacting how the PCC borrows and invests money. The Bank of England's Monetary Policy Committee, the MPC, set monetary policy to meet 2% inflation target. And at the meeting on the 2nd of August this year, the MPC voted by majority to increase the bank rate by 0.25% to 1.25%, and the base rate is still 5.25% this month. GDP growth has been around 0.2% during the first half of the year, and the Bank of England expects a similar growth rate in the near term. 12-month CPI inflation fell from 8.7% in May to 6.7% in August. It still remains well above the MPC's 2% target. Inflation is expected to fall further to 4.9% in Q4. In regards to the interest rate forecasts, and these are from our Treasury Advisors link group, I think we are at the peak now, which is currently 5.25%. It is expected to drop next year. This time next year, the forecast is 4.75%, and then in June we have interest rates seeing sort of around the 3% mark, 3.25%. In terms of the investment strategy, due to the increase in the Bank of England base rates over the past 6 months, the subsequent returns on investments have also increased when compared to last year, 22-23 financial year. The base rate at the beginning of the financial year was 4.25%, and that's obviously risen to 5.25% this month, since August. In terms of current investments, there is a full list of investments at Appendix 1 of the report, but in the main we've got 60 million sitting in money market funds, our liquid assets. We have most of 100 million investments with banks and building societies. 10 million of that is with one local authority, not Birmingham, it's sort of Cornwall. And the average cumulative interest rate achieved on the investments made so far in this financial year currently stands at 5.09%. The PCC's forecast investment return for 23-24 year is 5 million, and that's notably higher than the budget, which was 2.5 million. In terms of actual interest received to the end of August 2023, with the investments with banks and building societies and local authorities, we have had 341,000 to date. Money market funds, 929,000. We have 5 million with property funds. The first quarter return was 59,000, and we are expecting the same for the second quarter. The NatWest current account has also received a good level of interest from April to August this year, which was 264,000, which was at a rate of 1.43%. During the same period last year, the account received interest of 20,000, an average rate of 0.1%, so the rate's been pretty good this year. In terms of prudential indicators, it is a statutory duty for the PCC to determine and keep under review the affordable borrowing limits that were part of the prudential indicators that were agreed in the Treasury Management Strategy Statement, which was approved in March this year. The prudential indicators have not been breached to date. We currently have 105 million loans with PWRB. Most of those, 89% of those, mature after 10 years. And all the loans are also highlighted in the report appendix 2. Part of those loans, we have 2 unapplied amounts of borrowing, which are expected to be applied in this financial year. We have 7.5 million which is taken out, and that's expected to be applied against to spend on the estate strategy. We also have 7 million to support the vehicle replacement programme and IT infrastructure. No additional borrowing has been undertaken so far in this financial year. We're not really anticipating any more borrowing in this current financial year, but we are reviewing the estate strategy, so and on that too.
Okay, thank you. The comparison in the later paper with our closest comparators is quite interesting, looking at the way they finance. So, you know, there's a stark difference in terms of levels of borrowers. Richard had raised a question which is the sort of counterpoint. So this is highlighting for us that increasing interest rates is bringing in additional monies, but inflation presumably is taking money out in the other way. So as we haven't got a paper anywhere at the moment, there's just what's the current feel. I mean, we've seen that the pay award, that's been settled and it's funded, so that's fine. But things like inflation on energy prices, how much of an issue are they proving to be?
Thank you, Chair. So very much a kind of a significant pressure against the set budget for last financial year.
Yeah,
But you'll recall, I think when we did an update on the budget, kind of probably around this time last year, we talked about how we were being quite prudent in terms of what we were factoring in
yeah,
to the budget for the current year.
yeah.
So we did that, I think, put some fairly reasonable assumptions in and asked SIPA to come along and do a bit of a third-party review of our assumptions for the current year, just given the volatility of inflation. So we are kind of seeing our costs pretty much kind of in line with the budgets that we set, which is good. That doesn't mean to say that we haven't experienced very significant pressures as a result of that. So we're really obviously very keen for kind of those rates to start to come down.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that clearly happens on an annual basis is a number of contracts that are linked to either CPI or RPI, therefore have that kind of some baked into their kind of supplier contracts for the future. So we, rather than necessarily kind of just go along with that, the procurement team with each of our major suppliers has said, actually, whilst you have the ability to do that, you know, how realistic is it to expect us to pick that up? So we're trying to do a real challenge, sort of bottom and top down. So we'll continue to do that. In the current year, we're well within budget, and indeed we're doing a managed kind of approach to deliver an underspend in the current year, rather despite some of those pressures. And I think our prudent budgeting approach to things like the pay award has meant that when government funding's there's a little bit more flexibility than we actually originally thought we would have. So I think some positive kind of work by the team from a financial management perspective.
Yes.
But clearly that inflationary position absolutely does continue to happen.
Yes.
Do we have any money invested with Birmingham City Council or any connections there? No, it's good to hear.
Which isn't to say there are others just about to actually. I'm sure I know keep a very careful eye on that. Yes. Anything else? Okay, that's very comprehensive. Thanks very much for that, Sue. And Pete for the updates. Okay, we'll move on to the HMIC FRS value for money. So that's going to that to us.
Thank you. Okay, so I think just to pull out, the profiles are based on the HMRC FRS value for money profiles. They are actually based on the 22-23 budgets. And by the time we get to present at this board, they're already about 18 months out of date. I think as you've already pulled out earlier in the meeting, if we were to have similar funding levels to our most similar groups, we'd have about £47 million raw budget terms, which potentially pays for about 687 additional staff. Some of the outliers are similar to the last year and the year before. There are a couple of newer ones. Local policing, when you look at it across the local policing objective, we're similar nationally, but it appears that our most similar forces have higher investments in local policing than we do. We have differences across the sub-objectives within that group, but overall we're very similar nationally. I think to pull out government grants, we appear to be an outlier on this year. That's all linked to the ring-fenced foot grant, and it's just purely how each force has decided to apply it in their profiles. From an operational support point of view, we're outliers across a number of subjective groupings, and that's purely down to the Commonwealth Games. So when we move into 23-24, those should be removed as outliers. Serious and organised crime within investigations. We're an outlier on non-employment costs contraed out by local income. That is purely down to how the on ROCU that's managed by Merseyside accounts for all of their expenditure and income. So we approach it with each force holds their own budgets, and we have a balancing number at the end of the year that we call a settlement. They seem to account for it all as expenditure and all as income. External forensics has made an appearance for the first time this year. We are actually cheaper than a lot of other forces, but since 2010, I think if you take it back to that far, we've done a lot of work with the forensics team through various PVV processes to look at expenditure in that area, and we've driven a lot of costs out of our external forensic budgets. They've invested processes where they do a lot more in-house than potentially other forces do. But we've done a lot of value for money work in that area, hence why we come out a lot cheaper than other forces. Again, estates has come onto the list for the first time. So we did a bit of a look on the makeup of the estate budgets across our most similar forces. And I think the key area to pull out is that Manchester and West Yorkshire have quite a lot of estates rental costs, whereas actually we still own a lot of our buildings. And those rental costs are what is pushing their profiles higher and ours down slightly as well. And then we've got the estate strategy that we're working through, that's looking at all the maintenance in different areas. From a central cost point of view, capital financing and revenue contributions that you alluded to earlier, we've chosen to invest in revenue contributions to capital, whereas some of our most similar forces look like they fund their capital programs through borrowing, which actually at the long term is more costly than the direct revenue funding. We might see even out a little bit in next year's profiles because we've borrowed 7 million as a one-off to help balance this year's budgets, which is 2024. And then the last two bits to pull out are intelligence gathering and then the PPU have moved as outliers from last year to this year's report. From a financial point of view, you can't pull out exactly what is causing us to be an outlier, but we are working with our operational colleagues as we work through this financial year and into next year to understand from an operational point of view what might be causing those outliers. And I think we picked up again earlier in the meeting some of the changes that are going on in PPU and that might have an impact.
Yeah. It might be helpful to have, you mentioned that have a feel for, given the changes that have been made, what's going to change, and next year, it would be quite helpful to have a paragraph that said this and this has changed, but we expected that because this is what we've done.
Chair, that's absolutely right. One of the things, bear in mind, these are 22, 23 figures, kind of as Beth said, sort of, so 18 months kind of, past kind of the position. Clearly, the commentary that sits around local policing is very relevant to that. So we've had kind of a whole kind of, geographically based kind of operating model introduced now, and that will certainly reflect on the future changes as well. So one of the things, rather than just rely on this annual sort of set piece HMIC piece of data, there's a national program called, it's a bit of math, Achieving Financial Excellence in Policing. We play a very active role in that program. One of the work streams specifically that's really dialing up its kind of outputs is a lot of benchmarking between forces. So we're going to play a really key role. So we've got kind of a more of a live picture and understanding in a more granular detail where we need to across forces of some of these things. So the HMIC profiles are great for spotlighting kind of areas to then look into. But what we will do is spend a lot more time looking at those detailed comparisons, which I think will be actually much more helpful. And we were able to replay back to the comments earlier, HMIC's own kind of figures back to them in the strategic briefing recently, as far as our respective funding positions concerned, when we put that alongside performance.
I mean, that's very helpful. When I first took this role on, we used to get these reports and you'd see the outliers, and the report wasn't able to provide some of the explanation that you provided. So I think we've moved on from there because now we understand a little bit more about what's different, and that's why we're different. And we did initiate at one point an attempt on some of the clear outliers, the specific lines that were outliers to try and work with the most our closest comparators. So that was a piece of work we initiated, and really it didn't go anywhere because people, just it wasn't they didn't say no, but they weren't providing the sort of information that we were asking for. So it never got to a point where it was very helpful for us. But the committee very much understood that sometimes being an outlier either plus or minus was a good thing. It was just you needed to understand why it was and be assured that it was because you'd taken a decision to do something rather than, as it were, accidental. But it's better, so it's very good to hear that actually that's now something that is being worked on at a national level, because I think that will be very helpful to us. So we'll look forward to seeing that. Well, if we're all still about it, the point at which it comes to fruition, that's helpful. Okay, any questions? Yes, Kath?
So the table at 5.2 shows that Kent and Essex have invested really significantly in three neighbourhood policing. Is there any commentary that would be useful to have about how they restructure their force and how they're managing specialist operations, etc.? It's just that it seems a really significant significance of neighbourhood officers compared to the rest of the force.
Not at this point in time, because we generally focus on our most similar group, and either of those two forces are part of that group. We can certainly go and ask the
It
question.
looks like they've merged the response function in neighbourhood policing.
Could be something like that, couldn't it? Because there's huge patches of green, but concomitantly, there's not a lot of the other colour, but was it colour?
Yeah, they do have
Yeah.
very strong collaboration operationally. Forces, so
The
I mean,
two
may
of
well
them,
be- May,
yeah.
may not be a kind of a reason, but as Beth says, it's not something that we've drilled down into as like one of our most similar. However, through this wider piece of work, Kath, that I've referenced, I can kind of pick that up. With colleagues.
Yeah, it's just interesting to understand what the difference is.
Anyone else? Okay, thanks very much, Beth, for that. It is, before we move on to internal audit, which looks like being a substantial piece of work, I suggest we now take a short comfort break, just 10 minutes. We'll come back at 10:47, and then we can get into the audit. Okay. Are we expecting Andrew to?
No.
Okay, so we will review and pick up with the quarterly report from internal audit. Lynn. Welcome back. I should have said, well, welcome back in your.
It's nice to see
Started
you.
off by saying welcome back in your real job.
Let Jane know.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the internal audit update. So since the last time we reported, the report says we've finalised on 3 audits, but we've finalised another one since the report's been issued. And we've also issued another draft. So there's 6 in draft at the moment awaiting management actions. In terms of audit recommendations, we followed up on 24 audits, and the implementation rate is still hovering around 75%, which isn't too bad. But I'm getting slightly concerned about the number of medium and high recommendations that are starting to increase again. We got it down to about 26 in December, we're now at 43. So I think over the next sort of few months, I'll take an action away to pick up. I've already met with a couple of people about long outstanding recommendations to try and get them moving. But I'll pick up with some of the responsible officers for those long outstanding recommendations and try and get them sorted.
That would be helpful because they're in chunks, aren't there? There are a number where the majority, they're not spread about the old reports. There's a number where there's, there were 6 and 5 are still outstanding, things like that.
That's right,
Yeah.
and often they're interconnected, so
Yes.
the action of one will address another one,
Yes.
so, but, compared to where we were several years ago, I think it's still a positive position, and the percentage rate for those high or medium recommendations is 73% implementation, which is good, but I will keep an eye on the increased number that we're getting still outstanding. In terms of audit performance, the actual completion of the plan is 22%, which might seem low, and it is lower than we were last year at the same time. We were 24%, so it's actually not that low compared to last year. Early part of the year is normally heavily weighted to planning preparation, completion of last year's audits, etc. So it is normal for us to be low. But as the report points out, we have had issues with resources in the audit team. So I've been out of the team since March to the end of August, and we had a principal auditor leave us in July. So as at the end of September, we'll be 150 days shortfall in the audit plan. So we are currently out to recruit for the principal auditor. Closing date is tomorrow, and an exercise has commenced to determine what audits we can take out of the plan. And I have a meeting with DCC Green next week to talk about those potential changes on the force side, and I'll do the same with Jane on the OPCC side.
Yeah.
I think it's fair to say that because it's a principal auditor vacancy, some of the high profile audits might have to drop, but we'll do that in a managed way. In terms of audits that I need to update you on, there's just one this time that received a limited opinion, and it's often the most simple of processes that causes some difficulty. And this, what is a straightforward system, did result in a limited opinion. I think the issues in the report, if I could just highlight some of them, we tend to look at this to ensure that claims are legitimate, timely, accurate, comply with force policy. The risk of fraud is minimal. And I think what we found is that there were some gaps in the process. So the policy was quite outdated, and there was a lot of, there was a policy, there was guidance, there was supporting documents. None of them tended to be aligned or up to date, so that needed a little bit of work because the policy is sort of crucial to get the claims right. In terms of the management reports, there were management reports available within the system, but unfortunately the people who used to run those reports left the organisation, and the person who wrote the report had left the organisation, and I think the combination of those two, there was a lack of awareness of those reports, and also when we did produce the report as part of the audit, we identified some discrepancies in them. And because nobody was familiar of how the reports had been created, the macros within the report, etc., the issues hadn't been addressed. So the level of management checking was an issue for us. There seemed to be an oversight in terms of updating the rates of mileage, HMRC rates for mileage on the system. Luckily, the rates have stayed the same for quite a while. It only affected one category of officers and staff, and that was those who have a company car. So there was that seemed to be as a result of a communication issue, which is being addressed. And also within the sample of claims we did look at, a lot of the claims weren't in accordance with the guidance, and there was some areas where a different procurement route should have been utilised. So that's just a summary of the issues that's included in the report. Management have agreed a series of actions, and we will obviously follow up on those with our usual written in 6 months' time.
Yes, Lyndon.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I've just picked up on one particular item, 5.2 National Fraud Initiative. I think we discussed this before about obviously overpayments to deceased pensioners. I mean, it's a very sensitive subject, you know, and obviously approaching families of deceased employees, but I think not be getting this right by now. I mean, 30.
Yeah. So those 30 deceased pensioners resulted in £155,000 worth of payments. You are right in that we have to deal with that sensitively to try and recover those, and often we don't because we can't find the next of kin. So 30 is quite high. In between the two years that we do the National Fraud Initiative exercise, there is an exercise called mortality screening, which the pension scheme can take part in and do take part in. I think we've also reported to this committee about the resourcing issues within pensions. They're under tremendous pressure at the moment, and sometimes the results of those exercises are probably not picked up as properly as they should be. But there are sort of those exercises there which are run every quarter, and I think this one due in November that I will liaise with the pensions team about to see if they could submit data. But a lot of deceased pensioners, we are reliant on families actually notifying them of the death to avoid those overpayments in the first instance.
Although if they notified the bank and the bank had closed the account, the money couldn't go in.
That's true, yeah, but often those individuals don't have a next of
No,
kin
well,
that
that's
they can't name them.
suggests there's nobody actively dealing with
Yes.
persons' affairs.
Yeah.
Or possibly they know the pension's coming up, but you'd hope that it would be the former. Yeah.
I mean, you think it's something natural, is it? I mean, it's a family member. That's the first thing you do. You go to banks and building sites, you let people know. Can the bank not let, the pension people
If the
know?
bank are aware, often the bank are not aware that the person's died, so the account remains dormant.
Money's going in.
Money's going in.
Picking it up, yeah.
Yeah. Or it could still be active in that somebody's withdrawn the money and we don't know, which is the fraud element, but it's extremely difficult.
Yes.
I should also point out on National Fraud Initiative, we haven't finished the investigations. We are still working on investigations. So I'm aware that some overpayments that we're currently working on at the moment that might come through to the committee next time. It's in relation to some utility expenses, which we're just trying to, because of the way they bill, we've just got to try and do some calculations to see if they are overpayments or not.
So in terms of the report on expenses, I suppose that the things that do speak to issues with it's not the process. It's not what the process is. It's following the process. Is the approvals process. If the guidance says to claim mileage, you need to provide a petrol receipt and you haven't provided one, then somebody's clearly not following the guidance or you know, the person who's approving it. And similarly with expenses that are being claimed for things that could be procured through a different route. So
Yeah.
so it is worrying, and I just wonder how widespread that, you know, were there one or two that were found, or was it actually a widespread problem with expenses, as it were, being without proper scrutiny?
I wouldn't necessarily say it was widespread. It's just you know, when we did the sample, these were the obvious ones that jumped out to us, and things like uniform being purchased through an expenses system when we've got a national uniforms contract.
Yes.
I suspect it potentially might have been because the item wasn't in stock, but we would want to see the evidence of a manager proving that attached to the system, so that if it was pulled for audit, for example, because there are some audit checks around these expense systems undertaken within payroll, you know, it comes across as a legitimate reason why it's gone through that process, and not the procurement route that's designed for purchases like uniform.
I think some of it also is down to IT, isn't it? Because in the activity report at page 13, it refers to an issue where the word note is replacing some of the payment dates.
That's in relation to the accounts payable system, but it's exactly the same reason, Kath, because the people who write the report, or the person who wrote the report in the digital team, has left the organisation. The issue with the accounts, this is one of the recommendations that I've had a meeting about, to try and understand why it's not closed. So the individual who wrote the report's left the organisation. There's very complex macros in the report, and there's a lack of understanding about what those macros are producing. Also, when the report was written, there was a very limited amount of data in the system, and as the orders and payment systems grow, you know, it's been in place for 5 or 6 years now, the macros pulling out every transaction in the system to try and match it to see if there's a duplicate, which is too much for the report to handle. Ideally, we would want duplicate payment checks to be done before the payment run. There's no report within the system that would allow that to happen, hence this report was written, but it's now become too complex and too many transactions for the report to cope with. It's become unreliable. So one of the things I have discussed with the accounts payable service delivery manager is the compensate and control is obviously doing the checks retrospectively. So let's look to see what Fusion can offer us in terms of on the duplicate payment report, and get a process in place where those checks could at least be done very timely after the payment run, so that we could try and put a stop on the bank, or at least contact the recipient to recover the payment properly, rather than 3, 4, 5, 6 months down the line when we do the National Fraud Initiative exercise. So, but you're right, the issues are the same, although it's 2 different systems. The corporate knowledge of who wrote the report, the macros in the reports left the organisation, and why we're in the position of some of the management reports that have been produced locally.
Okay.
Chair, just one final observation, really, just for some additional information for members. So both of these areas, both claims and tax payable payroll perspective, we're moving responsibilities from what was the People and Organisation Development Service into finance. So Davinda has now kind of going forward got responsibility for all of these areas. And what we intend to do is just to bring a little bit more strength in kind of the financial oversight of each of those areas, and particularly through Davinda's governance boards, and then my kind of oversight of that, so that we're really focusing on bringing a bit of grip for each of those areas.
Two quick things. So the first one, probably not a helpful observation. I remain relatively relaxed about the breaches around purchase of uniform, as whilst we're reviewing our uniform supplier, we have got groups joining us where we haven't got sufficient uniform for them, and I'd much prefer them to have kit and have a report that says you've got outside procurement than not have kit. This is the first one. The second one's a really minor one. This was right at the time it was written, but it's not now. we don't have any company cars. So chief officers don't drive company cars, we drive service vehicles that are regulated differently. Because they're emergency service vehicles that the public aren't entitled to drive, so they're not company cars.
Okay.
It's just, it's not, it doesn't affect the accuracy of the report now, so then we don't drive company cars.
Okay. That's helpful. And I mean, it's not specific in the report that the items being purchased are uniform. So I mean, that,
Yeah.
if that's what it is,
But they
then
would
it
put
wasn't.
it
Amongst other things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. Yes, Kath?
Chair, are we going to look at the activity report next or is that this encompasses this main?
It's in there. Yes. So if you want to raise something on that.
Yes, please. So number 9 onwards talks about victims and witnesses and the issues around Connect and primarily around reporting information and the ultimatum of leaflets and information to victims of crime, which all seems to have stalled. If we could just have some reassurance around what that actually means for victims and witnesses and how that's going to be resolved. And then the other question is 26.
Yeah.
Which is Razo. There's quite a lot of information there about the activity that's taking place based on Operation Soteria. Now DS Barbara Martin seems to be the epicentre of everything that is taking place there. And again, I'm just after some reassurance that all the training and support that's required to make this all happen is not being left with her, that there's a team around and there's a team that's working towards organise.
That's fine, Kath. I mean, the victim satisfaction piece, we are in the process, well, it is in progress, that follow-up. So that update should be put through to the next committee, but we can update you in between meetings if necessary. And we are due to do the update on RASO. It should be due now, actually, because we agreed a longer period, if you remember last time, we agreed to allow time to let the recommendations be implemented as part of Soteria. So we will pick up on that one over the next month or so. If you want an update outside of the usual meeting, arrange that.
Yes, thank you. And one last question is the insider threat at the airport. Again, that seems to have been paused. Are there any implications for that?
And that was a paper to board, wasn't it? I think
Yes, paper. Yeah, board.
it went to the Strategic Police and Crime Board. I think it's still on hold at the moment. It is still on hold
Okay.
at the moment. So.
Okay, thank you.
So I should answer those two, not those 2 points. So the victim satisfaction thing, I don't want to get hung up on Connect because we have not taken the latest upgrade on Connect, so because we're not satisfied and it's stable enough. So I don't really want to expand on that too much for obvious reasons, but we're not currently taking it. But the management of our contacts and bonds around victims is my job to discuss the whole force. And there are some things we're considering around the way that we survey victims and so on. And in relation to Soteria, the date of that, which is from 2 years ago, we've just been inspected as part of people around Soteria, and the other feedback is that actually our performance around Soteria is very good. So we're satisfied with where we are. We are obviously in pilot force. We'll see that in more plans when it's written down and we get our draft report from HMIC. But again, I'm satisfied that if you ask me who's responsible for it, I'd say the detective chief superintendent, not a sergeant.
Yeah, sure.
I see what it says in the report, but I think it's not like, I wouldn't know the name of the sergeant if you ask me.
Yeah.
But I can tell you who I hold to account for.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. That's it. Okay. If that is all then on the internal audit report, then we'll turn to the external audit report, which will be down to Zoe.
Chair. So we're bringing before you the audit findings report. Those of you that have been on committee for a while would have seen in a similar format in previous years. Just as a reminder, this is something that we prepare to be presented to those charged with governance before the accounts are approved, so that they understand what's come out of the audit. So it's brought here for information, mostly because you're interested parties, but it may well be updated before we are in a position to issue the opinion. As I say, it follows a similar format to last year. It picks up the risks that we identified in the audit plan, and then we provide some commentary on how we address those risks. It also picks up on new issues that we've identified in the audit, and then details the amendments in the appendices that have been made to the accounts. There are also some further disclosures in the report that are around the matters that we have to report to you to comply with the code of audit practice, such as audit fees and our independence from you. So as we referenced in the report, there's generally quite a backlog in the sector in terms of issuing opinions on the accounts. We're still issuing opinions on 2021 accounts, 21-22 accounts. So to be where we are at West Midlands is probably in the trend this year. So we're and that really is down to the commitment of your finance team, both to produce a decent quality set of accounts, but also supporting the audit. We're not yet in a position to issue the opinion because we've got issues around the pension fund. When I say issues, we're waiting on the normal assurances that we get from the pension fund order, or West Midlands Pension Fund. Just until we receive that, none of the bodies will be able to issue an opinion on the accounts on West Midlands Pension. We've also got the accounts reflect a surplus on the local government pension scheme this year, which is a bit of a novelty to all of us. So I think we're working through with your team the IFRIC 14 considerations in relation to that. You've had some feedback from your actuary. We just need to work that through with your team now. And then finally, in relation to the CC pension scheme, we've got correspondence with GAD in terms of some of the assumptions. So we're obviously not pension experts, so we use PwC to assess the assumptions made by all the actuaries. And they flagged that GAD has made different assumptions around inflation. And when you put that into the sausage machine, it comes out with quite a material number. So we need to pursue that further. Although the number's probably bigger in West Midlands Police than most other forces, it's a national issue, so we need to consult nationally in terms of how we're going to take it forward. So we're hopeful. I've had assurances from the West Midlands Pension Fund team that they're expecting to complete their work, or at least be in a position to give us the assurances that we need in the next couple of weeks or so. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to conclude all this by the end of the month, which will be ahead of last year. So it's positive. But it will be it will be later than the 30th of September, which is what we were aiming for, which is a bit frustrating. So perhaps if I just talk about the report is pretty explanatory. So I just thought I'd focus on some of the adjustments that we've made to the accounts. So there are 3 amendments that we've made. The first is in relation to county pension. This isn't an audit finding. This is your team always requested, or in recent years have requested an update to the IS19 report. That wasn't available until after you drafted the accounts. So the amendment has been to the accounts. So that's not much of any concern particularly. The next one is around conversation we've been having here around an item that we identified in our sample testing, which was around a dispute with HMRC to do with how you might need to defer to finance colleagues on this, but it's to do with how you have accounted for VAT on Commonwealth Games stuff. So we don't think the accounts are wrong. We just think the data that you're identifying in the accounts is the wrong data. So
it was a presentational issue, I think, wasn't it? So, yeah.
So again, it's not a particular concern, but you have to make an amendment to the accounts just to reflect the position, because since the accounts have been prepared, you've had further instructions from HMRC in terms of their view on this dispute that you have with them. So the accounts reflect, the amendments reflect that opinion. Final one is around AUC, which is assets under construction. This has been something that's been in the accounts for a number of years, but it sort of was highlighted this year. Normally the sums involved in there aren't material, but this year there was a material adjustment in relation to an impairment of a IT scheme. Again, it's a presentational, technically, work in progress, assets under construction should sit with intangibles, they're within property, plant and equipment. So we've got to do an adjustment to the accounts and adjustment to the balance sheet on that. So again, none of these things are of particular concern, they're just reasonably chunky numbers. As I say, we're now trying to conclude the audit, so it's just dealing with partner review, those sorts of things, and dealing with these pension issues. So I can't guarantee that there won't be any further adjustments as a consequence of the pension work, but we're pretty well there.
Those are the days when public sector employers took pension contribution holidays because the surplus in the pension pot was so big, which happened 2 years running when I was on Shropshire Kent, but not under our control. I have to say we didn't agree with it, but there you go. Kath, have you got?
Sure. For assets under construction, the National Data Analytics Solution, is that 9.9 million has been written off to that? Is that right? And do you know what the issues are around that? How we came to be involved in it and why we're not involved in it?
No, we haven't got into the detail because we were focused on the accounting, but we have highlighted that we do want to look at this a bit further as part of our value for money work. So just to get an understanding, but my understanding is that it was a scheme that's been funded by the Home Office. I don't know how much of it was funded, whether it's 100%.
Don't have a lot of detail, but we are going to do a follow-up, and we can obviously share that follow-up with committee members. But it was a Home Office funded national scheme, as I understand, that West Mids was kind of acting on behalf of the Home Office, and the Home Office funding has ceased. And I think the project nationally may have been paused. So from a strict accounting position, from West Midlands perspective, that's the right thing to do. We obviously just need to tie in.
The total amount that was funded was impaired.
So will we get that 9.9 million back?
The 9.9 million was funded from the Home Office. So what we had was the project stopped.
Right.
So as a result, the whole amount was impaired.
It's more of an accounting treatment in terms of what the ultimate potential asset was.
The other question is around Steelhouse Lane. Now that's been reclassified from a heritage asset to an operational heritage asset. What makes it an operational asset now? And does that change the insurance liabilities?
I have to defer on the insurance liabilities, but my understanding is that I'm not familiar with it, but I understand that it's been made into a museum, that there's been quite a lot of investment over the last 12 months or so in terms of making it into a museum. Our challenge was, well, is it a heritage asset then? But the response to that was, although it's a museum, it's also used for operational purposes. So there is a classification that you can have, which is not operational heritage asset.
What makes, do you know what makes it operational as opposed to a heritage asset?
Can I just clarify? It wasn't a heritage asset initially. So last year it was an asset under construction because we had a lot of refurbishment going on, I understand it. So now it's fully functional. It's an operational asset. It's not classed as purely heritage asset because it is used for other things as well. So you can use it for parties, hiring, and of course we did this couple of years, which is still how we should classify it. We have classed it as operational and that it should be operational.
So, anything else then on the external?
I think, Chair, if I may, just at our end, thanks to the audit team. And, Zoe did say at the start that we are in a fortuitous position where we're ahead of the game compared to many others, and it isn't just a case of kind of the finance team partnership we have with our external auditors in terms of the work that we do. I kind of really wish the pension fund auditors had been sufficiently prompt as our teams are, because we would be in a different position then, but we will deal with that, and we look forward to hopefully the kind of the confirmed opinions coming through as soon as possible.
Yes, yeah. Well, you'd hope all of the employers who are part of the pension scheme might be coming together to seek to commission something that didn't place a premium on the prompt finish of their audit. Yes, anyway. Okay, thanks very much, Zoe, there. So that just leaves us with the work programme. That may, I mean, you know, the circulation of what we look at committee doesn't change, but obviously we do know that with the conversations that you're having on how you deal with the rest of the audit plan and on the current workforce might mean that there are things that we might be expecting to see that we won't. But does anyone have anything else that they want to add? That concludes our business. So thank you all very much. That was probably